All right, welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined, as usual, on Mondays and starting in the fall on Wednesdays by my co-host Thomas Dimitroff, the CEO of Sumer Sports. Thomas, how was your weekend?
Weekend was good. I was just chilling. There was a lot going on here. I cannot believe sometimes that I'm not involved day to day with football when I'm out doing stuff around the lawn on a training camp time. It's unbelievable for me. Sometimes I'm blown away by it. How about you?
Yeah, it was a good time. I mean, I did some, you catch up on workouts, you catch up on sleep during the weekends. August is like a weird time for us, right? In the, sort of consumer space because, we're trying to get out all the products that we're ever going to get out before the season starts, before that, turns over a little bit. So the weekend, relaxing, got to watch some football, got to watch some CFL, Thomas. And I got to tell you, those games are like very entertaining. I know you, a former Canadian football player yourself. It was a lot of fun. Got to read some too. So, but I'm excited for the week that is now. We still get, by the way, we still get some preseason football tonight with the Washington Commanders playing the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens trying to keep 25 consecutive games, one in the preseason streak, alive. That'll certainly be interesting. But yeah, it was a good weekend. Good to get some relaxing in. But I can feel, Thomas, the football in the air though. Like it feels imminent currently, and it's a little bit different than it was last year when sort of leaving PFF and joining Sumer right as the season starts. So I'm excited for the fall this fall.
I totally agree. And when you start talking about the Commanders, there's a lot being talked about regarding the Commanders, right? You want to start talking about Mike Florio and Chris Sims talking about they twist up and down about it. Mike Lombardi was commenting on just how Coach Rivera addressed the whole coaching situation there. When you're a team that's kind of in a little bit of uncertainty, and again, most every one of us as GMs and head coaches have been in that spot, there is a dicey, testy time, right? So was Ron Rivera being testy about it with Eric, or was he not, right? I mean, Eric Bieniemy is a good coach. He's a hard-nosed coach, as you know, but none of us know how that is, right? When you're the head coach and you're not sure just how it's all going to kind of play out, you want to be the right person. And that was one of the things Mike Lombardi was saying, right? As a head coach, you need to stand strong and tall, which Ron is. I'm not saying in no way he isn't, but that's an important thing, right? How do you handle your new offensive coach that comes in? How do you handle it to the media and the fan base? It's complicated.
Yeah, it is. It's very much so, and we talked about that a little bit last week on the Sumer Sports Show, the Monday episode. If you want to go back and watch, but we talked about the awkwardness of Eric Bieniemy coming in, the sort of, and again, like I think Eric Bieniemy will make that team better. I think that they'll run a lot of stuff that will protect the offensive line. When Bieniemy was the offensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs, everybody talks about that Super Bowl where Mahomes had no time to throw, but people forget that team went 16-2 prior to that game with 3 of the 5 offensive linemen hurt almost the entire year. It was only when that 4th offensive lineman got hurt that they couldn't protect themselves against Tampa Bay. And a lot of that is due to some of Bieniemy's, RPO stuff, a lot of, some of the things that he's truly good at as a schemer. I think big questions about whether he can call plays are there because Andy has always called plays in Kansas City. But when you look at guys like Doug Peterson, even Matt Nagy, who I think had his moments in Chicago, some of those guys, when they've left the Andy Reid nest, have been fine play callers themselves. So it'll be interesting to see where they go from there. As you said, a lot of uncertainty in the nation's capital. One of the truly storied franchises, the NFL, is now transitioning to new ownership, and we'll see. They did announce that Sam Howell, Thomas, will be the starting quarterback for the Washington Commanders in week 1. They are, you'd be surprised about this, Thomas, week 1, they are 6-point favorites against Monty Austinfort and Jonathan Gannon's Arizona Cardinals at home. That is one of only 2 games where Washington is favored this season to win. So it'll be, they were a surprise 500 team last year. I do think they have a significant amount of talent. And they, much like the rest of their division, is facing a tougher schedule this year. It'll be interesting to see where it goes from there.
It will. A lot to play out here. And what do we have? One more preseason game? It seems like, is that right? One more?
Yeah, we have one more week. What I like about this, and I have to confirm this, but like back when there were 4 preseason weeks, the last week was the penultimate week to the regular season. And everybody played on that Thursday. If I'm not mistaken, they've spread out the games a little bit this final week because there's a week between this week, which is the final preseason week, and the first week of the regular season. And I like that. I never really liked, and maybe you can comment on this more than I can, obviously having been a part of it, but I didn't really like the whole everybody plays on that Thursday night and then everybody's cut by Sunday. And then the first Thursday night game is 4 days after that. Like I'm a fan of like kind of where they're going with it now, which is to say to give everybody sort of a bye week before the season starts. To me, that feels better than what we had previously.
Definitely like the bye week better. Gives you a chance to settle down. It gives you a chance to go through scenario after scenario. Of course, there are so many layers to making your final decisions. I have said many times, however, by the end of the spring, you have a pretty darn good job of to know of where you're going to go with the cut downs. But there's always some of the finishing touches, of course, that come into play. Obviously, as the end of preseason is coming up. Look, the other thing I do believe, we talked about this before in another discussion. I mean, preseason games are important, and they are important to a certain extent. You get people, you work on certain things, not as much scheme, but you work on the young guys, you put them in a spot, et cetera, et cetera. But there's also that side of what I said. When you win preseason games, back to Baltimore, right? When you know that you're about winning all the time, yes, you don't want to get injured, but I think there is something to say for regularity as far as approaching every game competitive and win what you can win, of course, without getting injured.
Yeah, for sure. So just to back this up, this week, so we have a game tonight between the Ravens and the Commanders. We have 2 games Thursday, 3 games Friday, and then the remaining games, with the exception of one, are on that Saturday. Then we have a game on Sunday. So then from there on Sunday, we have all the way until Kansas City meets Detroit week 1 on September 7th. So there is like a nice sort of spreading out period. As Beat Gamer 99 also says, they also changed the cuts to one final cut instead of step cutting. That's interesting as well. So that, I think that that is going to make the lives of general managers easier, and in a lot of ways, because again, you have a more spread out opportunity to be able to sort of make that decision, look at other teams' rosters. And of course, if you work with us at Sumer Sports, you will have even more bigger set of tools upon which to work this time of year. Good question here from Sean Donahoe, one of our listeners who frequents the show. At one point, this is for Thomas. At one point, do you know as a GM, do you know you'll be active in the cut down market, i.e., you're eyeing up other teams' potential cut candidates to fill slots on your roster?
Well, I think honestly, Sean, right? You said Sean Donahoe. Yep. That's a good name. Good Irish name. I mean, look, it's all contingent from season to season on how you're playing out, where your injuries are, where your contracts are, as far as, are they coming up? Do you have youth in your world there, or, are you looking for something specific? So usually that happens when you go into camp. You start watching within the first week or two, and you start realizing, like, we need to really hone in on A, B, and C, and X, Y, and Z before the end of the cut downs, because otherwise we might be without. So I think, that is also contingent on how your team is made up. If your head coach is all about churning people through your roster, Sean, then that's a big thing. If you have a head coach like Mike Smith was, my first head coach that I worked with on the head coach GM side, Mike was a lot more wanted consistency with the team, right? Didn't want to be pulling and releasing. He wanted to be very consistent. Whereas Dan Quinn was all about, man, every time we could churn to make it better, we would. So it is obviously very contingent on how your head coach wants to approach the building of the team.
Yeah, I remember Pete Carroll in the early years of Seattle when he was taking over from Jim Mora, and it was like a record number of transactions, right? It's in, out, in, out, in, out. And it was funny because Carroll presents himself as this kind of like culture-y, there's hacky sacks everywhere in the building. There's books by Angela Duckworth and other, Adam Grant and people like that around the facility. but at least at the beginning, he was very cutthroat in trying to create the roster that was his. And then there, other teams are going to be a little bit more, to your point, they're going to be a little less liberal in terms of how many roster moves they make. And, sometimes there are just opportunities, right, that present themselves. For example, Josh Huff is somebody who rushing the passer really well for the Jets right now. He's leading the NFL in pressure rate in the preseason. You look at that roster, he's behind a bunch of players, including 2 first-round picks, back-to-back drafts, Will McDonald, as well as Jermaine Johnson. So he could just be available in a year that is different, right? Like, and sometimes those opportunities present themselves that are different from one year to the next. So it's never really a cookie cutter sort of answer.
And then the human side, Sean, as I probably alluded to earlier, you could have a guy that you think is a better player, but the repercussions of moving someone on the back end of your roster that has a really good leadership element to him and a camaraderie team element to him, that's part of our jobs as team builders, to make sure it's not always purely about the talent. There are other things that you have to work into it before you make some of those decisions. Ultimately, you do want the best talent, of course.
Yeah, I moving on to another topic. Like, I feel fairly fortunate to be saying this, but like, we don't have a ton of really bad injury news in the NFL every single week. Just to give people a little bit of our an on-air production meeting. Like, I sent Thomas the notes late last week, and it's like, let's talk about some injuries, and I'm not sure why. And I'm happy with it, but there's not that many like key injuries in the NFL right now. You have Teron Armstead, who I think avoided major injury this past week. That's the second Dolphin who's going to be an important player for them, Jalen Ramsey being one, Armstead being the other, that have gone down this preseason. You had Treylon Burks for Tennessee, again, carted off the field, but it's not ending up being one of those ACL type of things that's going to keep him out for a long time. There are some other injuries that have come up a little bit, like Tevin Jenkins, for example, is not going to start the first week as one of the guards for the Bears. But for the most part, Thomas, we're not seeing like Trent Green goes down and now Kurt Warner's the starter in St. Louis, or, we're not seeing any of those like really bad injuries. And, I think a lot of that is those concussion helmets in practice. Some of that's helpful. I think that these teams are starting to get smarter about how they play players. And it's not a uniform solution, right? Kansas City's out there playing their starters for a quarter, and then there are other teams like the Rams who aren't playing their starters at all. And it seems to be what's right for each team. And so far, we've got lucky, fingers crossed, that there aren't too many key injuries that have moved betting markets, for example, this preseason.
We're fortunate, and I'm going to swing it back to you. When you see how unbelievably unattractive those helmets are, and yet you realize the health side. I wonder where we're going with that, by the way. Little aside for 30 seconds. Do you have a thought about that?
I think so. I know that like Mike Florio, for example, said they should play games with them. I feel like there's something lost. I don't think practice is the same environment as a game, and so I'm skeptical that it'll work in a game. But the data on like lack of concussions is compelling. So I feel like there's maybe a halfway solution, but I would find, and again, like, we haven't really talked about the kickoff rule. Notice like no one's fair catching kickoffs right now, even though they put the rule in specifically for teams to fair catch kickoffs. I think that once they get in the regular season, they'll do it. But the NFL is like not a place necessarily where we eschew aesthetics for efficiency all the time, right? Like, so I think that some players will. There might be a player or two. You remember Steve Wallace, who played tackle for the Niners in the 90s, where he had like that second helmet, right? And like it was like a shell on top, and it was to prevent concussions. Like, he was one guy who did it. My guess is, Thomas, that if it's like for truly, they'll find a solution for frequently concussed players that will be some sort of in between the normal helmet and this like floppy thing that they put on helmets during practice. I don't think that they'll ever just go wholesale to the actual shell during games.
There was also another guy at the Bills named Kelso, who was a safety, who had the same thing. And you're exactly right. We always think there's no way. You never know. I've also have heard people talk about if they ever get the helmets exactly where they need them, will it cause more neck fractures because you feel like you're basically infallible? Well,
yeah, I mean, there's a school of thought that when you look, and again, I don't know the science on this, so just But there's a school of people who believe that the helmets themselves cause violent play because people use it as a weapon. And when you look like relative to rugby, I'd have to look at the data, but when you use your helmet as a weapon, it could cause more concussions than not having one at all. I don't think that that's true, but I do think that there is some sort of idea of like the more protection you give a player, the more they might want to use it, and it could be more harmful to them. So that's an interesting thought. I do want to move on and talk briefly because having you on here, Thomas, it's like you get this really good perspective, right? So for people who are new to the show, welcome. For everybody that doesn't know, Thomas was the general manager for the Falcons for 12 and a half years. The best, as somebody astutely noted in the chat last, the best stretch of football in the history of the Atlanta Falcons was with Thomas as the GM. Draft picks generated more value out of the Atlanta Falcons from 2008 to 2020 than any team in the league per pick. So you can identify a lot with what Joe Douglas is going through because Joe Douglas is on the hot seat, which you were on a couple times, right? Early, the early years when kind of that 2013, 2014, kind of right out of those championship teams. And then obviously at the end there where, you eventually did have to leave Atlanta. And so you have experience on the hot seat, but also you have experience drafting really good players. And Douglas has drafted some really good players. And yet it's still like the seat is hot for some very specific reasons. And it makes for a very interesting 2023 for the Jets because on one side, if you're a general manager and you drafted the offensive and defensive rookie of the year in the same draft, you should have some job security. And yet it feels as though, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it feels as though the 2023 season is a do or die season for that entire organization because of how much talent it has and the fact that they have not made the postseason since 2010. It's a very tense moment in the history of the New York Jets, Thomas.
Well, I don't know where we begin there. Let's go back and forth a little bit on it. Is it hot? Is it warm? Of course. You were so kind to say I was on the hot seat twice. I'm like, oh my God, I think as a GM, I'm on the hot seat every other year, if not every year at some level, right? So Joe Douglas, I've said this before, Joe is a really, really good football evaluator. He's a good football man. I say this about some of my favorite contemporaries around the league that were GMs, that were former scouts, that came up through the ranks. A lot of really good football people out there. But Eric, what I would say, and part of you being evaluated as a general manager and as an evaluator and as a team builder, even though your O'Sullivan buddy doesn't like us saying team builders, it's another thing. But the reality is there are team building elements there that's how you're judged, right? It's not just about the pure evaluation of the talent. It's how you're putting it all together. It's the decisions that you make. I have some of my closest friends that were former GMs who might not be now, some still are, who just were not hitting it right on the overall decisions, right? There are people out there that are some of the best, I think, football eyes and minds in the world. And I'm saying, I think Dave Caldwell, I've said this before, former Jacksonville, has a really, really good and acute eye. Unfortunately, some of the stuff that they did there organizationally was playing against them because of some of the decisions they made. So what I'm saying is Joe has a lot of decisions on his plate right now. They need to work out. There is no question in my mind or the football people's minds that Joe Douglas does not know anything. He knows everything about evaluating talent. And his head coach, they work together. With Saleh, they work together well that way. But you have to start making the right decisions. I mean, a new quarterback coming in, as Aaron does, is a big decision, right? A drafting of a quarterback who still is a good quarterback. I will be interested to see how he plays. We haven't started talking about him yet, right? But those are big decisions to be judged on. And last thing, you have an owner in Woody Johnson who, I feel like has a little bit of he loosens it a little bit. I don't think Woody Johnson is always there looking to cut and slash. I think he wants the best for that organization. And I think
for sure.
So go ahead.
Yeah, and it's one of the storied franchises in the NFL. I mean, you're the winner of Super Bowl III, and like, a team that has had its moments. I mean, even people that you're well connected with, right? When you look at Parcells and Mangini, and like a lot of that Patriot sort of culture. Even back to the old Browns culture with Mangini. You have they've tried a lot of things, right? They even tried Adam Gase when Gase was finished with the Dolphins, because Gase was able to beat the Jets a lot. And like it seems like they've tried a lot of stuff. They've even gone, I mean, when you think about it, guys like us would say, well, you draft Sam Darnold. Now Douglas didn't draft Darnold. He came in 2019. But you draft Darnold. It doesn't work. You write it off immediately. You go right to Zach Wilson. I think a lot of us would say, yeah, that's probably the right thing to do. Zach Wilson doesn't work. And you're like, geez, what are the odds that 2 top 5 quarterbacks don't work? In fact, I was telling you a stat off air. Zach Wilson and Trey Lance are the first top 10 picks at quarterback in the NFL since Matt Leinart. And Matt Leinart, by the way, was the 10th pick. Matt Leinart is the last quarterback before Wilson and Lance to not be the starting quarterback week 1 of the 3rd season of his rookie deal. And that's two CBAs ago, right? So what Zach Wilson is going through is relatively unprecedented in the current NFL. And so I like Douglas because I see the Sam Darnold. He's like, well, we can't keep buying back it. We can't keep throwing good money at bat. So then they go with Wilson. Wilson in 2 years doesn't show much. And he's like, we can't keep throwing good money at bat. So then they go ahead and they trade for Aaron Rodgers. But all that does, right, is lever you up a little bit, right? It puts a lot of pressure on the situation, right? Every time you draft a young quarterback, and you know this because you took Matt Ryan in the top 5 in 2008, it buys you some time. Not as much time as you think, as you will correct me, but it buys you some time. When you bring in Aaron Rodgers, it's win now, and it just puts a lot of pressure on a team because the Jets haven't really been able to go through that rebuilding phase. They've always kind of been struggling, and then now they have huge expectations. There's kind of been no middle ground, and it's truly a unique situation in the NFL, and it's why I want to talk about it today, because I'm just so intrigued by kind of what they have up, what they're going up against.
Look, given how you just played that out, and talking about former quarterbacks before Aaron Rodgers, I mean, I would welcome it 100%. Let's go. Let's move forward on this. Let's embrace this. Let's embrace getting a Hall of Fame quarterback in here, still with legitimate time on his contract and on his legs and his arm, et cetera, et cetera. Because I do believe that with the right game planning and the right people around him, I think he can be really special still. That's what I think. So I take it. I would say do it. That's your way, Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh, to make really strong, concrete decisions, to show your ownership that you guys, when things are tough, when you're truly being evaluated by the tough decisions, you're gonna be lauded for it. And that, again, is what I believe the really good GMs out there, when they're faced with the complicated, difficult decisions, how do they adjust? To me, I think that speaks volumes to their ability.
Yeah, and Rodgers is not unsalvageable. And when I mean that, you look at the efficiency numbers that Aaron Rodgers had last season with the Jets, with the Packers. I'm sorry. They were very similar to what Tom Brady was able to put up with New England in 2019. What were the things about New England in 2019? They didn't have a ton of support at wide receiver. You were able to bilk a second-round pick off of them because they were so desperate for Mohamed Sanu, right? And they had, they didn't have great receivers. Their line was a little sketchy, and Brady was kind of in that 6-ish, 6.9, 6 to 7 yards per pass attempt, which is below kind of, what he's used to. That was kind of where Rodgers was last year. The one concern I have with Aaron, though, and again, like I've been saying this a lot about the Packers, because on the last show, I'm very bullish on Green Bay because I love kind of everything, that I just love the way Green Bay does business. That doesn't mean I'm anti-Aaron Rodgers, but I think Aaron Rodgers is a great artist. And I think some teams need a quarterback to draw between the lines. And I'm think for the Jets this year though, the offensive line, if you look at the Sportfolio Kings, rankings of the offensive line, it's like they're 25th in the NFL. That's the one place where I get worried because Aaron Rodgers, when he was with Green Bay, has always had pretty good offensive line play. Bakhtiari, Clifton, the Corey Linsley, one of the best centers in football, etc. To me, that's the one place where if Joe Douglas were to make a trade over the next 2 or 3 weeks, it'd be, to me, to get a starting offensive lineman into the mix to help them out because when I look at this roster, that's like the only weakness. They're great in the secondary. They have really good depth along the defensive line, and Quinnen Williams is a great lead player there. Wide receiver, they have a lot of wide receivers. Tight end, they have good depth, and then they brought in Dalvin Cook to complement Breece Hall. I think offensive line's their only weakness, but as you know, Thomas, that's not where you want to have your biggest weakness on an NFL team.
No, not at all, and I understand that. Where we're going right now with the Jets and where we're going, to your point, when you look at their roster right now, do I fold in Sumer a little bit and talk about roster value? Maybe we don't go there. The roster value of this team, if I can flip it back to you for a second here and play the toss game, where are you with that complete roster? So I'm not getting away from the O-line discussion, but where are you with the roster?
Yeah, I mean, let's actually go ahead and load up something here. Let's present for the viewers where Sumer Sports is actually on the Jets. If you go to the new sumersports.com, Thomas, how does it look?
Looking good.
Good. So if we go to the league table here, if you look at the Jets, we have the Jets ranked power rating wise. So this is like kind of an idea of roster value, 8th in the NFL. They have an ELO rating of 1526.7. That's average is about 1505. So there's a clearly very good football team. We do that have them with a pretty tough strength of schedule. When you look at their schedule, it's a top 4 difficult schedule in football. So that's why we only have them, in that 8.6 wins range. We actually have them an underdog to make the playoffs. The markets are a little bit heavier on them than we are. So we like the Jets. Obviously, the situation's going to be tough. They're in a division where I think every team, whether you're looking at, your old team, the Patriots, whether you're looking at the Miami Dolphins, who we talked about, good expectations, but 2 key injuries to players, and then Buffalo, a team that I think we all respect what Brandon Beane and his team is doing out there. To me, I think the Jets are a top 10 team in the NFL talent-wise. I think that there are leaks, obviously offensive line and how well Rodgers plays that could torpedo the team. But it reminds me a lot, Thomas, and I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to make the obvious choice, but when Tom Brady joined Tampa Bay in 2020, it feels similar to me, right? A great roster. It might take some time for them to get going. You'll remember the Saints back when Brady joined Tampa, the Saints were a consistent 12, 13 win team, making the playoffs deep, never getting over the hump. And Brady joins that division, right? They play the Saints week 1, lose. They get killed by the Saints midseason. And they're kind of laying back, right? And they kind of snuck up on people in the playoffs. The Jets play the Bills week 1 this year, right? It's very similar parallels to, and the Bills have been a team that's won 12, 13 games kind of every year. They haven't won a Super Bowl. And it would be sad if you're a Bills fan that the Jets just come up and win one against you, very similar to the Saints with the Bucs. But it's to me, that's if I'm looking for the ceiling for this team, I'm looking for let's say they get the 5 seed, they go play on the road in the AFC. Rodgers' only Super Bowl in the NFL. You took part in it, you were part of the road there, but Rodgers' only Super Bowl win in the NFL was from the 6th seed playing on the road. He's always struggled as kind of a favorite. So to me, I think that's where I could see the possibilities for the Jets would be to sneak up on people and for us to wake up in January and be like, hey, this is a team that's going to be in the playoffs. They got a lot of talent. Watch out for the Jets in January. That's kind of how I see it. I think it's going to be a slow evolution, though. I think much like Tampa in 2020, they're gonna be feeling themselves the first half of the year, and hopefully the AFC isn't too difficult for them to stay above water for when they get hot. they'll actually be in the playoff race.
Well, look, when we start talking about this, I get so excited about not talking about preseason, right? I want it for real. I was thinking about some of the pods I was listening to today, right? And I was just thinking, wow, I can't wait for those Mondays and those Wednesdays that are coming up. We are set to have Wednesday shows as well. You and your group, of course, are continuing to do things throughout the entire week. But I really can't wait until we can start talking about, where the Jets are really going, how Aaron Rodgers is going to play, quite honestly, how the Atlanta Falcons are going to play, with what's going on with their quarterback. I don't want to – I'm digressing here only because I'm getting kind of excited thinking about the next wave of this, this league, of course. And,
yeah, I'm pretty pumped for the first time I get to go to the Sumer office and watch football all day Sunday and just BS around and enjoy you and Sean and everybody else, Chase and everybody else that's there. I think that'll be a lot of fun. I'm really excited for the season as you are. And when I think about, like, last week we talked about Houston's kind of in that beginning phase, right? And I think that I think that you should be optimistic about the Houston Texans, even though the last 4 years have been rough. I think with the Jets, the last 12 years have been rough. And in fact, they haven't won their own division since 2002, since the first year of realignment. Think about that, Thomas. You weren't even a Patriot yet. I mean, you were probably a Patriot under case P, but you weren't you weren't part of the Patriot paradigm yet. The last time the Jets won the AFC East, like, this has been a long time coming, and they have a great fan base. Obviously, you'd love for them to do well, and the pieces are in place there. So I think if you're a Jets fan, optimism should be a part of your daily football diet. Now. So speaking of optimism. There's a chance to win at Circus Sports. This is the last week we're going to do this promo because this weekend is the sign-up weekend. It's also week 0 of college football. Circusports.com. We've said this a number of times on the podcast, but they've been a great sponsor for us. If you come out to Circa Las Vegas, we will get you some Sumer swag, everybody. So how cool is this? Look, the overline there that Thomas got on the hat. But yeah, come out and see us in Las Vegas this weekend. It'll be myself, Parker Fleming, Tate Chef, who have also hosted the show a number of times this summer. You have to sign up in Vegas for either the Millions or the Survivor competition, but you can play anywhere. So you don't have to go out to Vegas every single week of the year, just this next week. But we'd love to see you there. They've been a great, as I said, sponsor. So circusports.com. Thomas, before we leave, any parting words on the season coming up?
No, not on the season right now. Again, I want to make sure that if you do come back with something tattooed on your neck or on your forehead, from Circus Sports, that weekend that you're heading to Vegas this weekend, right? We don't make sure we're watching you closely.
Yeah, but, I mean, look, I have nothing against tattoos personally. I just don't ever want to get one myself, so I think I'll be okay. I'm a vet. So the thing for me, I'm a veteran of Las Vegas. I know, I actually had a call with my team today being like, hey, here are some ground rules, X, Y, and Z. Because it is important. The biggest thing with Las Vegas, Thomas, and I know you've been there because you are a world traveler. The drinks are cheap. You go sit at a craps table, you start playing, they're going to bring out some margaritas, and it's 115 degrees. To me, you have to understand the danger of that combination. Cheap drinks and sweltering hot weather, you have to avoid one at every single time. So you can be out in the heat, but you can't be drinking. And you can be drinking, but you can't be out in the heat. But you can't do both, to me. And so if I can impart any knowledge on anybody, that would be it.
I love it. And I would love to also say, we're putting things together here, the 35, 40 minutes. And I can't wait until we have legit topics to talk about. And I want everyone to rest assured that we are going to be addressing some pretty, real topics. Hopefully we'll continue to do that. We are obviously a thriving business. We want to be a thriving business. We have to be smart about it, but we do have opinions, and we'll continue to have strong and stronger opinions. Right, Eric? Things that need to be discussed and some of the myths that need to be debunked. I think both Eric and I can both do them from our perspectives. I'm really looking forward to taking this to another level coming into this year. That's what I'd add.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's important. There's an element. I don't think your peers nor mine would respect us if all we did was say nice things about everybody. And I think, I do think that what's really interesting and something that is important to realize when you listen to shows like this is these buildings are not monoliths. So if we say something, for example, like we are making opinions about the Jets, there are people in that building who disagree with us, and there are people who agree with us, and they both live in the same building, right? And so what I really love about the league is the diversity that is within every building. And back when I was at PFF, I'd get like messages from teams. I'd be like, "Hey, I loved your show," and I'm like, "We dragged you up and down the field on this show," and they're like, "Yeah, I actually agree with what you're saying, but I got overridden by the decision maker." It's like, oh, okay, well, it's important to realize that and to know that it's just a game and we're all having fun, and we can all have opinions about these things. And luckily for the listeners of the Sumer Sports Show, you get Thomas's perspective and in the 12 years in the league, and you're not gonna get that anywhere else in a podcast. So thank you all for coming. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We're gonna end a little bit early today. So for Thomas Mitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been the Sumer Sports Show.